I still remember the exact second my breath caught in my throat. Not because of what happened, but because of what it meant. My eyes registered something my mind refused to accept at first, and my heart responded before logic had a chance to intervene. I stood there frozen, pretending to look anywhere but directly at the truth forming right in front of me. A rush of disbelief, heat, and fear tangled inside my chest. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining things. But my body knew better. And in that moment, I understood. This was the beginning of something I would not be able to undo. At home, life had become quiet in a way that felt heavier than shouting. We lived side by side, shared space, shared routines, but not much else anymore. Conversations were practical, trimmed down to necessities. How was your day? Did you eat? Don't forget tomorrow. The kind of words that fill silence without touching anything real. Nights ended with backs turned, not out of anger, just habit. I told myself this was normal. Long relationships settle, passion fades, people grow comfortable. But comfort, I was learning, can look a lot like loneliness when you're the only one still reaching. That I missed being seen. Not admired, not desired in some dramatic way, just noticed. I missed someone looking at me like I mattered in that moment, like my presence altered the air around them. My partner wasn't cruel or unfaithful. That almost made it worse. There was no villain to blame, no explosion to justify the emptiness. Just slow erosion. Day after day of feeling smaller, quieter, easier to overlook. I started questioning myself in mirrors, wondering when I became someone forgettable. That's when he entered my life. Not with drama. Not with intention. Just there. Close enough to notice things others didn't. The way my mood shifted before I said a word. The way I laughed when I was nervous. He listened, really listened, not waiting for his turn to speak. At first it felt harmless. Friendly. Refreshing. I told myself I deserved conversation that didn't feel like a chore. I deserved to feel human again. There was a difference in the energy when he was around. Subtle, but undeniable. Conversations lingered longer than necessary. Silence didn't feel awkward, it felt charged. I became aware of my hands, my posture, the way I breathed. I caught myself replaying his words later, smiling at nothing. And that scared me. Because I knew the rules. I knew how these stories usually begin. With denial. With, "It's innocent." With small permissions that feel too insignificant to matter. That I started noticing the distance at home more sharply. Every unanswered message, every distracted nod felt amplified. I didn't create the comparison on purpose, but it formed anyway. One presence felt dull and heavy, the other light and electric. I hated myself for noticing. I hated myself more for wanting that feeling again. The moment that changed everything didn't look dramatic from the outside. No one else would have noticed. It was brief. Silent. But something shifted between us. A look held a second too long. A pause where neither of us moved away. My body reacted before my mind could stop it, and that terrified me. I felt exposed, like my thoughts had suddenly become visible. I looked away first, heart pounding, pretending nothing had happened while knowing everything had. The guilt came fast, sharp and suffocating. I told myself I had crossed no real line. There was no touch, no confession, no betrayal I could point to. And yet, something inside me had already stepped somewhere it didn't belong. I went home that night and lay awake beside someone who trusted me, staring into the dark, replaying a moment that wouldn't let me go. That I knew then that this wasn't about him alone. It was about what I had been missing. What I had ignored. What I had allowed to starve quietly inside me. And as much as I wanted to rewind, to choose safety and familiarity, a part of me was already leaning forward, curious and afraid, knowing that once you feel that kind of pull, pretending it never happened is the hardest lie of all. After that week, I tried to convince myself everything would go back to normal. Awkward moments happen in families, especially in households where people are still figuring out their roles. I assumed Tyler just needed time to forget what happened. But the strange tension in the house didn't fade the way I expected it to. Instead, it slowly started getting worse. Tyler became even more withdrawn. Before, he used to come downstairs occasionally to grab snacks or watch television in the living room. Now he barely left his room unless he absolutely had to. Sometimes I would hear him walking around upstairs late at night, long after Daniel and I had gone to bed. At first I thought it was typical teenage behavior. But something about his nervous energy felt different. It wasn't just isolation. It was like he was constantly worried about something. One evening I tried to lighten the mood while we were both in the kitchen. I casually joked about how teenagers practically lived in their rooms these days. He forced a small smile but didn't say much. His eyes briefly met mine, then quickly shifted toward the front door again. It was the same reaction I had noticed before. Every time Daniel was expected to come home, Tyler seemed tense. I started paying closer attention to things around the house. Not in a suspicious way at first, just the kind of awareness you develop when something feels slightly off. Daniel's schedule had always been busy, but lately it felt like he was gone even more than usual. Some nights he wouldn't get home until almost midnight. When I asked about it, he always had the same explanation. Extra work, last-minute meetings, problems at the office that needed immediate attention. I wanted to believe him. I really did. Marriage requires trust, and for a long time I never questioned his explanations, but little details started piling up. One night during dinner his phone buzzed on the table. He immediately flipped it face down without even looking at the screen. That might not sound strange, but Daniel had never been secretive about his phone before. I asked who it was out of simple curiosity. He shrugged and said it was probably someone from work. Then he quickly changed the subject. Tyler noticed it too. I could see it in the way his eyes briefly flicked toward the phone before he looked away again. The tension between the two of them was subtle but definitely there, over the next couple of days I noticed the same pattern repeating itself. Daniel's phone was suddenly always within reach, but never visible for long. If a notification appeared, he'd clear it immediately. If a call came in, he'd step outside to answer it. One evening he took a call while standing on the back porch. I wasn't trying to listen, but the sliding door was partially open, and I could hear pieces of the conversation. His voice sounded different, softer, almost careful. It wasn't the way he normally spoke to coworkers. There was a tone there that made my stomach tighten slightly, even though I couldn't hear the other person's voice. When he came back inside, he acted completely normal. Too normal, actually. He asked about dinner, talked about some random work story, and then went upstairs to take a shower. The strange feeling in my chest didn't go away. That night I found myself replaying the past few months in my head. All the late nights. The sudden work emergencies. The growing emotional distance between us. I realized there had been warning signs I ignored because I didn't want to see them. Still, I told myself I was overthinking. The last thing I wanted to do was become the kind of person who constantly suspects their partner without real evidence. A few days later, something happened that made it harder to ignore the feeling. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch while watching television. His phone was sitting on the coffee table in front of him. I wasn't paying attention to it at first, but then the screen lit up with a notification. Normally I would never look, but the name that appeared on the screen wasn't familiar. It wasn't saved like a coworker's name. It was just a single first name followed by a small heart emoji. My chest tightened instantly. The message preview was short, but it was enough to send a wave of cold realization through me. It wasn't a work message. The words were affectionate. Personal. The kind of message you don't send to someone who's just a colleague. For a moment I stood there frozen, staring at the glowing screen. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something I wasn't ready to face. Because once you see something like that, you can't pretend you didn't. Daniel shifted slightly on the couch, still asleep. I quickly looked away and walked into the kitchen, trying to calm my racing thoughts. My hands were shaking slightly as I gripped the edge of the counter. Maybe it meant nothing, maybe it was a misunderstanding, but deep down, another part of me already knew the truth was probably much worse. Later that evening Tyler came downstairs to grab a drink from the fridge. When he saw me standing there quietly, he hesitated like he wasn't sure if he should stay. I asked him if everything was okay. He nodded quickly, but his eyes kept shifting toward the living room where Daniel was still sleeping on the couch. Then he said something that caught me completely off guard. He asked if Daniel had been home much that week. The question sounded casual, but the tension in his voice gave it away. It felt less like curiosity and more like he was checking something. I told him Daniel had been busy with work. Tyler looked down at the floor for a moment, his jaw tightened slightly, like he was struggling with whether to say something else. For a second I thought he was about to speak, but then he shook his head quietly and grabbed his drink. Before going back upstairs, he paused at the bottom of the staircase and glanced at me again. The expression on his face wasn't embarrassment anymore. It was guilt, and that was the moment I realized something important. Tyler wasn't just acting awkward because of the incident earlier that week. He was acting like someone who knew a secret he didn't want to carry. And suddenly, the message I saw on Daniel's phone felt a lot less like a coincidence. That night I barely slept. The message on Daniel's phone kept replaying in my mind over and over again. I tried to convince myself that I might be misinterpreting it, that maybe there was some harmless explanation I hadn't considered yet. But deep down I knew the truth usually hides behind small moments like that. A strange message. A secretive phone call. A shift in someone's behavior you can't quite explain. When you start noticing those things, it becomes impossible to ignore them. The next few days I watched Daniel more carefully than I ever had before. I didn't confront him. I didn't accuse him of anything. I just paid attention, and the more I paid attention, the more obvious the cracks became. He guarded his phone constantly now. If he left the room, the phone came with him. If it buzzed, he checked it instantly. Even when we were sitting together watching television, his attention kept drifting toward the screen in his hand. At dinner one night his phone lit up again. I saw the same name appear across the screen, the same heart emoji. That he quickly turned the phone over before anyone else could see it. But by then I already had that. I forced myself to stay calm. Reacting emotionally without proof would only lead to denial and excuses. If something was really going on, I needed to know the truth before confronting him. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. That a few nights later Daniel fell asleep in our bedroom while scrolling through something on his phone. The device slipped from his hand and landed on the mattress beside him. His breathing grew heavy within minutes. For a long time I just stared at the phone. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Part of me didn't want to touch it. Once you cross that line, you can't go back to pretending everything is fine. But another part of me needed answers. Slowly, I picked up the phone, the screen unlocked with his usual passcode. My hands felt cold as I opened his messages. The name with the heart emoji was right at the top. When I opened the conversation, the truth hit me like a punch to the chest. The messages went back months. They weren't vague or questionable. They were intimate, emotional, and undeniable. Long conversations about meeting up, about missing each other, about moments they had already spent together behind my back. There were plans. Photos. Late-night messages sent while I had been sleeping just a few feet away from him. Every doubt I had been trying to silence suddenly became reality. Daniel had been having an affair, not something recent. Not a brief mistake, months, maybe longer. That I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My chest tightened as I kept scrolling through the messages, each one making the betrayal feel heavier. While I was reading, the bedroom door creaked open behind me. That I turned quickly. Tyler was standing in the doorway. For a second neither of us said anything. His eyes immediately dropped to the phone in my hands, and his face went pale. That he knew exactly what I was looking at. "Dad's asleep?" he asked quietly. That I nodded slowly. The silence between us felt thick and uncomfortable. Tyler stepped further into the room, glancing once at Daniel, who was still asleep and unaware of anything happening. Then Tyler looked back at me. There was no confusion on his face. No surprise, just guilt. That my voice felt unsteady when I spoke. I asked him how long he had known. That he didn't answer right away. His shoulders slumped slightly, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. Finally he said he found out a few months ago. That he hadn't meant to discover it. According to him, Daniel had left his laptop open one night, and Tyler saw messages popping up on the screen from the same woman. At first he thought it was nothing. But curiosity got the better of him, and he ended up reading some of the conversation. That's when he realized what was really going on. I asked him why he never told me. Tyler looked down at the floor, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. He said his dad made him promise to stay out of it. Apparently Daniel had caught him looking at the messages one day. Instead of explaining anything, he told Tyler that it was adult business, and that bringing it up would only cause unnecessary problems in the family. Tyler admitted he felt awful about it. He said every time he saw me around the house he felt like he was lying just by staying quiet. But he didn't know what to do. Telling me would mean betraying his father. Staying silent meant betraying me. So he did nothing. That was the secret he had been carrying. The awkwardness after I accidentally walked into his room suddenly made more sense. It wasn't just embarrassment. He had already been dealing with the stress of hiding the truth about his dad, and every time he looked at me, he probably remembered it. I closed Daniel's phone slowly, trying to steady my breathing. The anger and heartbreak swirling inside me felt overwhelming, but oddly enough there was also a moment of clarity. Everything finally made sense. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the distance that had slowly grown between Daniel and me over the past year. Tyler shifted uncomfortably near the doorway, like he wasn't sure if he should stay or leave. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. His voice sounded sincere, and I could tell the guilt had been eating at him for a long time. I shook my head slightly. None of this was his fault. The responsibility belonged to the man sleeping in the bed behind me. For months Daniel had been living a double life under the same roof, believing the truth would never surface. He trusted silence to protect him, but silence has a way of breaking eventually, and now that I knew the truth, there was only one thing left to do. Daniel was going to have to face it. I woke up the next morning with a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in months. The knowledge of Daniel's betrayal weighed heavily on me, but it also gave me clarity. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Pretending everything was fine, pretending that the life I had been living was real, was no longer an option. This wasn't just about anger or heartbreak. It was about reclaiming control over my own life that I decided I would confront him calmly, without shouting or hysteria. I wanted him to face the consequences of his choices, not just brush them off with excuses. The moment had come to stop pretending and to demand the truth from the man I had once trusted completely. When Daniel finally appeared in the living room, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, I was already sitting on the couch with Tyler quietly behind me. There was no dramatic setup, no lingering hesitation. I simply held up the phone and said, "I know everything." At first, Daniel froze. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then finally to defensiveness. He tried to dismiss it, to tell me I was overreacting, that I must be misinterpreting the messages. But I stayed calm and didn't flinch. I placed the phone on the coffee table and let the evidence speak for itself. Each message, each timestamp, each plan they had made, all of it undeniable. He stammered, trying to justify himself. He spoke of stress, distance in the marriage, emotional disconnect, work pressures. He painted himself as a victim of circumstance, but the words sounded hollow. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, but I kept it contained. I wanted him to realize that excuses could not undo the betrayal he had orchestrated right under our roof. Tyler stood silently beside me, his eyes on his father. He finally spoke up, and the room fell quiet. He admitted the truth he had been carrying, the knowledge of the affair that had haunted him for months. He described how he had tried to protect me while also protecting Daniel, and how unbearable it had become to hold the secret. The words hit harder than I expected. Not only had Daniel betrayed me, but he had also put his son in a position where loyalty to him meant deception toward me. Daniel's face fell as Tyler's words sank in. For the first time, he couldn't deflect or manipulate the narrative. The weight of his choices pressed down on him, and the silence that followed was almost unbearable. I watched him crumble, not in physical collapse, but in the realization that the life he had tried to maintain through lies was unraveling completely. I spoke then, my voice steady and firm. I told him that betrayal wasn't something that could be excused by stress or emotional distance. I explained that what he had done had not only broken my trust but had also fractured the family we were supposed to protect together. The anger I had held inside for weeks poured out, controlled but unmistakable. I laid out the consequences, that I could not, and would not, remain in a life built on deceit. Tyler listened quietly, his face reflecting a mixture of relief and sadness. The burden of secrecy had been lifted from him, but the damage to our family was undeniable. He had been caught in the crossfire of Daniel's decisions, and now he could finally speak freely without fear of retribution. Daniel tried one last time to regain control, to plead for understanding, but it was too late. The trust that had formed the foundation of our marriage had been shattered beyond repair. I realized then that staying would only perpetuate the cycle of lies and betrayal. I had to make a clean break, to step away and rebuild a life where honesty and respect were not optional. By the end of the day, I had made my decision. I would leave, and I would ensure that Tyler knew he could be safe and supported no matter what. The house would no longer be a place where secrets festered and lies multiplied. I would take control of my own life, reclaiming the dignity and peace that had been stolen from me. As I packed a few essentials, I took a final look at the home that had once felt like a sanctuary. The memories of love and hope were now mixed with betrayal and disappointment. I knew it would take time to heal, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of empowerment. Sometimes life forces us to confront uncomfortable truths in ways we never expect. The moment I accidentally walked in on Tyler had seemed trivial at first, a minor embarrassment that could be ignored. But it had been the first domino to fall, the spark that exposed a much larger truth. That one uncomfortable moment led to clarity, to confrontation, and ultimately to a decision that would redefine my future. I realized that betrayal doesn't always announce itself. It hides in small actions, in secrecy, in the way people choose to live behind closed doors. And while discovering it can be painful, facing it is what allows you to reclaim control and rebuild your life stronger than before. Walking out that door, I knew the next chapter of my life would be mine entirely. No lies, no deceit, no compromises. Just the truth, and the strength to move forward. The hardest moments sometimes reveal the truths we cannot ignore, and for the first time in months, I felt free.